Greeting and salutation everyone. It is Marwan Ahmed Al-Utaibi. Today we have our fourth presentation. On the first presentation we talk about Corona. The second was immigration. And the third one was discrimination. But today we have a famous historical figure. Our character today is Dr. King. Unlike the others, we have only 5 things to talk. Number 1. The introduction of the character. Number 2. What did he do? Number 3. What was his efforts? Number 4. How did he die and what happened after it? And the last one is the end of the story. Number 1. The introduction of the character. Dr. King, or Martin Luther King Jr., was born on 15th of January in 1929. He was an American Christian minister and activist who became the most visible spokesperson and leader in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. King is best known for advancing civil rights through non-violence and civil disobedience inspired by his Christian beliefs and non-violent activism from Mahatma Gandhi. About Dr. King's early childhood. At his childhood home, King and his 2 siblings would read aloud and people instructed by their father. After dinners, their King's grandmother Jenny, who he eventually referred to Mama, would lively stories. For the people, her grandchildren, King's father would regularly use whippings to discipline his children. At times King's whippings to discipline her children. At times King Sir would also have his children to whip each other. King's father later remarked King was the most peculiar child. Whenever you whipping him, he stand there and tears would run down and he never cried. Once was with Mr. King witness at his brother A.D. initially upset their sister Christine. He looked at telephone and knocked out the AD with it. When he had brother were playing at their home, AD slid from the banister and he into their grandmother Jenny, causing their fall down unresponsive. King, believing her dead, blamed himself and attempted suicide by jumping from the second-story window. Upon the hearing that grandmother was alive, King rose and left the ground where he had fallen. The second one, what Martin did for the black people. In March 1955, Claudie Cloven, at 15 years old, black schoolgirl in Montgomery, refused to give up her seats for the white man in violation of Jim Crow laws. Local laws in the southern United States that enforced racist segregation. King was on the community for Birmingham African American community that looked into the case. E.D. Nixon and Clifford Durr decided to wait for the better case to purpose because the indent in violation to mirror. 9 months later, on the 1st of December 1955, a similar incident occurred when Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seats for the city bus. The 2 incidents led Montgomery bus boycott, which was ordered and planned by Nixon, led by King. The boycott lasted for 385 days, and the situation became so tense that King House was bombed. King was arrested during his campaign, which concluding at United States District Court ruling the Powder Viscount that ended racial segregation at Montgomery public buses. King ruled buses boycott transformed him into national figure and the best-known spokesman of the civil rights movement. What about his efforts? Martin Luther King Jr. was a well-known civil rights activist who had a great deal of influence on the American society in the 1950s and the 1960s. His strong belief in nonviolence protest helped to set the tone of the movement. Boycott protests and marches were eventually effective, and much legalization was passed against the racial legislation. And also, Martin Luther King Jr. won the Nobel Peace Prize at the Congress passed on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This law made illegal to treatment of the people differently because of the color, their skin. They were trying to buy a house, rent apartment, or go to restaurant, for example. And also, here I have a lot of efforts, activities, and achievements that Martin Luther King did. Number one, brought publicity of the major civil rights efforts. 2. Promoted non-violence during protest. 3. Contributed in founding in the African American civil rights movement. 4. Leader in Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. 5. Was one of the founders of the South Christian Leadership Conference and its first president. 6. Fought against segregation in Albania and Georgia. 7. Helped to organize non-violence protest action in Birmingham, Alabama. 8. Was one of the organizers of the March Washington 1963, where he delivered his I Have a Dream speech. 9. Helped organize the Selma of Montgomery in March 1965. Number 10 and the last one. Worked on segregated housing in Chicago. Number 4. Dr. King assassination and what happened after it. King was booked in room 306 at the Loriana Motel in Memphis. Ralph Aldrich, who was present at assassination, testified to the United States Select Committee assassination that King and his entourage sat at room 306. So often that it was known as the King Anthony suit, according to G.C. Jackson, who was present. King's last words on the balcony before his assassination were spoken to musical Ben Branch, who was scheduled to perform that night at the event King was attending. Ben makes you sure to play Take My Hand, pursues the Lord. In the meeting tonight, play it real pretty. King was fatally shot by James Earl Ray at 6:01 p.m. the 4th of April 1968. As he stood on the motel's second floor balcony, the bullet entered through his right face, smashing his jaw, then traveled down his spinal cord before loading his shoulder. Apparently, heard a shot from inside the motel room and ran to the balcony to find King on the floor. Jackson said after the shooting he was cradled King's head as a king on the left balcony. This account was disputed by the colleagues of King Jackson. Later, changed to his statement to state that had reached out for King. The assassination led to nationwide waves of race riots in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore, Kansas City, and dozens of the other cities. Presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy was on his way to Indianapolis for the campaign rally when he was informed to King's death. He gave a short, improvised speech for the gathering supporters, informing them to tragedy, urging them to continue King's idea for the non-violence. The following day, he delivered a prepared response for Cleveland. James Farmer Jr. and the other civil rights leaders also called non-violence action, while the more military, shockingly Carmichael called for more force. Response to the city methods quickly settled to the strike terms favorable to the central workers. Number 5 and the last one, the end of the story. Dr. King did a lot of things for the black people. He showed the whole of the United States black people is half the community. They deserve everything just like the white people, such as the jobs, ranks, salaries, and respect. He wasn't against the white people, but he didn't like what they are doing. His speech was very influential, even after his assassination. He got beat 4 times and busted from the police 20 times just to fight the racism and persecution. All I can say, he was a symbol for amputation man. That's all what we have for Dr. King today. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope everyone liked that character I gave it to you. And I'll see you in the last presentation, and goodbye.